The offensive line for Iowa State is going to be a big factor in this one. Iowa's got a very good front seven, very very good defensive line, much like Kansas State did. You want to see continued growth. They did look, they were doing what they could in the running game, given that South Dakota was selling out to stop the run. But they looked good in pass pro. South Dakota never really threatened Rocco in any meaningful way. They looked good there. You want to keep seeing more and more growth out of that offensive line, especially against Iowa. But we saw them do it against Kansas State, who's again a very good front seven in their own right. And I don't see any reason they can't do it against Iowa. It's just going to be, one of their biggest tests of the year. The offensive line. This is one of the two best defensive lines they were going to run up against were probably Iowa and Kansas State. They had a good game against Kansas State, especially in the second half. Had a good game against Kansas State. They can do it against Iowa. We need to see that, and we'll see how that manifests in Iowa, leaning on its run game like it did against Kansas State, which I know they would probably like to do. But we've also seen that if Iowa is going to really sell out to stop the run, Iowa State is more than happy to go start throwing the ball around and hit its tight ends all over the place. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at on offense. So, Dylan Jaybird says Dylan Lee was impressive and Flora hasn't been impressive on special teams, whether he's a gunner or a returner. I really hope Flora is able to play this weekend. Yeah, we're going to talk about special teams here in a little bit and exactly how Aiden Flora figures into all of this. But Dylan Lee did come in towards the end of really basically the entire last quarter and a half of the South Dakota game. He was the primary running back and he looked good. He's got wiggle. He's got speed, good vision. I don't know for sure if that was like enough to get him, gain, carries against Iowa in any critical situations. I don't know. Maybe it was. That would depend on, I have no reason to believe that Carson Hansen, Abu Sama aren't healthy, but like if for whatever reason one of them is a little bit banged up, maybe then you would definitely see Dylan Lee get some, or if, Hansen and Sama are both having bad games or whatever. But either way, Dylan Lee looked good. You have to be encouraged by what you saw from Dylan Lee whenever his name is going to get called for meaningful stuff. Let's flip over to the other side of the ball now. You have to excuse me. My voice is really hoarse. I've been kind of like half sick since I got home from Ireland. Move over to the other side of the ball. Iowa State on defense, Iowa on offense. The great news for Iowa State on defense is we've seen an okay analog for Iowa in the form of Kansas State. Both have quarterbacks that can run the ball. Avery Johnson's a different kind of runner than Mark Gronowski. Mark Gronowski is definitely more of a physical runner that's okay with finding contact. Avery Johnson is a coward that is very fast. I would say it has generally been able to deal with both in the past, but especially if you know that it's coming. The tricky part for Iowa State will obviously be dealing with Iowa's offensive line in that running game, who they ran for 300 yards against Albany. We will see if they can follow that up against a defense with a pulse. Albany is not only an FCS school, but they are a bad FCS school. Iowa did what Iowa should do against FCS teams, which is dominate the offensive line, dominate the line of scrimmage with their offensive line and let the running backs do their thing. Freshman Xavier Williams had a good day. Tough guy to bring down, very much reminiscent of like a Sean Green type. If any Iowa State fans are remember that guy, Doak Walker Award winner, I believe, or finalist at least for Iowa. Tough guy to bring down. Not necessarily the fastest guy, but good enough in Iowa's scheme to do what he needs to do, basically. They've got a few other guys. Jazz Patterson's in there, worth noting. Kamari Moulton, we'll see if he's playing this week. I don't know. He got injured last week. I don't know if Moulton is playing or not. That's really what you're dealing with for Iowa State's defense. The tricky part here, weirdly, the X factor, I can't believe I'm saying this. The X factor for Iowa on offense is their passing game, which frankly is a crazy sentence, but I really think it's true. because Mark Gronowski was not only, I mean, his final stat line, um, I think it was 8 for 15 for 44 yards, something in that neighborhood. Um, Not good. Just a real tough, real tough day. I'll pull it up just to make sure I get the exact right. I know they had 44 yards passing. Yeah, 8 of 15, 44 yards passing and a touchdown for 2.9 yards per attempt, 5.5 yards per completion. Now he did finish better than he started. I think he completed like 6 of his last 7 or something like that. His first quarter and a half were some of the worst football I've ever seen from an Iowa quarterback. It was befuddling. It didn't make any sense, but he was taking easy throws, like a 20-yard completion to a wide open receiver in the end zone and short hopping it by 5-10 yards. It was pretty wild to see. He was missing rudimentary throws by 10 feet. It was befuddling. I don't understand. Like, nobody could figure anything out about why this was happening. Um, he got better, but the way he started that game and just the complete lack of initiative from Iowa, from Tim Lester in the passing game, the willingness to just not even attempt to get your quarterback in any sort of rhythm throwing the ball was a confusing decision for me, to say the least. And if I were an Iowa fan, I would feel very unsatisfied with the complete lack of attempt to establish any sort of an acceptable passing game. Now, Iowa as an offense, as a program, is never going to ever be the program that sits back and is getting ready to throw for 3 bills or for 350, 400 yards. It's never going to happen. Usually if they break 200 yards passing, that was a big day. They had 44 against one of the worst teams in the FBS or in the FCS. And they really didn't try. Granted, that was because they ran for 300 yards in Albany. And I totally get wanting to just run the ball and get out of that game. I get it. I do. The problem is that transfer players take a while to get up to speed. Especially transfer quarterbacks need time. They need reps in the offense to figure out what's going on, to get up to speed to the FBS game, to get more feel for where their scheme is at. Only throwing 15 passes, and especially those first like 7 or 8 of them, and deciding we're going to do as little passing as possible this game instead of getting Gronowski into any sort of reasonably good rhythm. I frankly, I think is a mistake, because now you're asking Mark Gronowski to finally find his sea legs in the FBS at a Power 4 program. You're asking him to do that on the road against one of the better defenses on his schedule, one of the better teams on his schedule, and one of the best secondaries he's going to face all year. Maybe the best secondary he's going to face all year. And that just seems like a dubious proposition to expect him to go from, what that just abomination we saw against Albany and then magically turn into Andrew Luck against Iowa State on the road. That seems risky to me. Especially because Iowa's running game is going to be running into a defense that is very deep at the linebacker, at the safety spot, at the corner spot. They're deep with bodies at all of the, especially at linebacker and safety. Iowa State has plenty of dudes, plenty of capable people in that depth chart to be able to sit there and deal with a persistent Iowa running game that is just going over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. They've got the bodies to stay fresh. I think the game plan, a game plan that revolves around trying to wear down the Iowa State defense via the running game for Iowa, is not a winning one. There's too much depth for Iowa State at the 2 most important positions in terms of stopping the run in Iowa State's defense. the linebackers, and the safeties. Because they're all sitting behind Dominic Orange on the defensive line, one of the best nose tackles in college football. How Iowa chooses to deal with him with their offensive line, how they choose to handle Dominic Orange, I think is going to be a major tipping point one way or the other into how this thing goes. Because if Iowa is having to dedicate 2 or even 3 guys to dealing with Dominic Orange in the running game, especially, that leaves open spaces for Ken Eziogu, for Tomatoa McDonough, Vontroy Malone on the defensive line to start shooting gaps and try to blow stuff up in the backfield. Or that's Bo Goodwin or Caleb Bacon, Cooper Ebo, Will McLaughlin, Caleb Brazina, any of those guys at the linebacker. Or coming down from safety, you've got Jamison Patton, Marcus Neal, Kyjon Cummings Coleman, Drew Surges, who's had a very good start to his season, and Carson Van Dinter. You've got all of these guys coming now. This is the defense that is probably the best equipped to slug it out with Iowa in a running game. But if Iowa State can get out to lead and force Iowa to play from behind, if Iowa State can get out to lead, force Iowa to play from behind, Iowa's passing game has so many question marks around it right now. With one, can Mark Gronowski hit the broadside of a barn? And 2, what Iowa pass catcher can be an actual game changer? We know that they can catch a 5-yard hitch route. Can any of them catch something in the middle of the field? Can they catch it on a slant and turn a 5-yard gain into 15? Can they take one 30 or 40 yards to the house? I don't know. We haven't seen any of that. The longest completion last week was Jacob Gill for 13 yards. And I think he ran a little bit after. I think he might have run a little bit after the catch. I don't remember now for sure. But there's so many questions around the Iowa passing game that I think if you can get Iowa playing from behind where they have to pass, Iowa State is more than happy to play that game. They've got plenty of secondary talent and experience to deal with whatever a passing game Iowa's going to come up with. And that's, you're probably seeing a theme here. And I will summarize my theme here towards the end of the show here, and just kind of once I start getting into kind of a prediction. But I just think the game plan for Iowa State on defense is much more simple than what Iowa has to do in defense to stop Iowa State's offense. For Iowa State on defense, it's bottle up the run, make them throw it. Period. That's it. That's all there is to it. That's how you win. And for Iowa State on offense, don't give them the ball. Don't turn the ball over.